Hello, I'm Lee Bernick, Dean of the Greenspan College of Urban Affairs, and I want to welcome you to another edition of the Urban Report. Today, as our guest, we have the Executive Vice President and Provost, John White. Welcome, John, to the Urban Report.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for coming. At a recent event, we were sitting there and someone asked for a show of hands for people who were first-generation college graduates, and it was interesting that about over half the people were first generation at the meeting, but you were not. And so how about telling us a little bit about your background and where you come from and
Sure.
your experiences?
Well, I come from a place called Plaisance, Louisiana, which is outside of a town called Opelousas, both of which are small enough not to be known. But my dad was an attorney in Opelousas, and his parents were, farmers and kind of operated on other people's farms to make ends meet. And he was the first of his siblings to go to college and went on to law school and became a civil rights attorney and did some of the desegregation cases and represented lots of school teachers and that sort of thing. And what was a tumultuous time for us, we were little kids, and so it was pretty bucolic. We were out on the farm and pretending to be farmers, even though obviously we're being supported by a lawyer's income rather than the farming income. But it was a great experience for us because we grew up on the farm and got to know, raising cattle and raising chickens, and so it was a big thing.
So it was a farm, but it was not a crop farm, it was an animal.
It started as a crop farm when we were much smaller. They tried to do soybeans, and before that I think they had done sweet potatoes. And eventually, I think at the time of the oil crash in Louisiana, all sorts of farming was deeply affected because land prices had run up and everybody was invested in the previous land prices. It wasn't atypical of what we see in Las Vegas now, but that drove them out of soybeans when the price plummeted, and they got cattle and gave their young children something really difficult to do.
So you had to go to work on the farm?
Yes, indeed.
Did you work before you went to school or something?
Well, these are beef cattle, so we didn't really have to do that, but we definitely worked every day when we got back. And later on, throughout the summers, we were pretty much all time.
And do you think that farm experience had any impact in shaping your current or your work ethic or?
Well, sure. Probably as much as my time in college running track, where I had to juggle academics with running. But the farm experience, I think, inspired a can-do kind of attitude. I mean, really, the thing about doing farm work is that it has to be done, and if somebody's not working well enough, you just have to go do it.
Okay.
So that's not a model I'd like to duplicate as provost, but it certainly is something that made me responsible for the end result, which is what I'm focused on.
And you talked about siblings. You had your father had siblings, but you have siblings too, right?
Correct. I'm the oldest of four, and my sister's a school teacher in Baton Rouge, and I have a brother who's a law professor and another brother who is a political scientist. The law professors at Colorado and the political scientists at Ohio State.
Well, we're going to come back to the
Sure.
brother at Ohio State, the political scientist. But so your father was an attorney and a civil rights attorney, and this was during desegregation cases. And did you were supported by this, by him being an attorney. Did you recognize the importance of? I mean, what was it like at home besides being on the farm? I mean,
I think we thought of my dad more as a political figure because that clearly is what he enjoyed. He enjoyed, talking to people about policy and how you should, change things. And of course, the desegregation cases weren't your normal litigation. They were enormous cases that took many, many years to resolve. And at the same time, it kind of hid the day-to-day practice of a small-town attorney, which was variable and really nostalgic kind of practice because it doesn't really exist anymore. To the extent it exists in large concentration, Las Vegas and the rest of Nevada might be a place where it still is popular. He handled everything from criminal cases and divorces on the one hand, and then on the other hand, he had these complicated civil rights cases to work on.
And the civil rights cases were federal civil rights cases. Right?
Yes,
so
absolutely.
he went to the federal court. Did he ever go to the Supreme Court? Or?
He didn't go to the Supreme Court in any of his cases. He's at the Fifth Circuit quite a lot, as you'd imagine. But most of his cases were jointly represented with Legal Defense Fund.
Okay.
And so they tended to do the Supreme Court components of them, but none of his specific parish desegregation cases went to the court as a standalone.
Okay. Well, now you've just given people another indication that you're from Louisiana. You talked about a parish case.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Right? Now,
That's right.
Can you explain what a parish case is?
So parishes are counties, but Louisiana's a traditionally Catholic state and comes from French and Spanish heritage before it was acquired in Louisiana Purchase and became a state. That's a really complicated and interesting transition, and they're in their bicentennial right now, which is pretty interesting as well, but maybe a little bit beyond our topic here.
Okay. Well, let's get back on topic. So you grew up in these small towns, and you went to Southern.
Yes.
Right? And you ran track.
Mm-hmm.
What did you run? And
Yeah, I was a distance runner, and I never really thought about college selection. Southern was the family college. There were a few family members who were traders and went to Grambling, but all is forgiven.
Well, your one brother who's at Ohio State went to Southern, right?
Yes. Well, all of my siblings went to Southern.
Okay. They knew better than to go anywhere else.
No, that's right. It was just the cousins who went to Grambling.
Okay.
But in any case, I went there and wasn't really sure I would run. I had been a good runner in high school, and then chose to run essentially. And it was a very rewarding experience. My initial coach was a gold medalist in the hurdles, Rodney Milburn.
Okay.
Taught me to jump hurdles, which was, I guess a little badge of honor thinking back at it. But I ran the distances. I was focused on the steeplechase while I was jumping hurdles, which is, for those who don't know, is 3,000 meters, just short of 2 miles. You jump 28 hurdles and 7 water jumps. And it was fun because you had those obstacles in the way. It was a very difficult race, required a lot of strength and stamina. But I liked the fact that it was always changing. You couldn't, kind of fade off and be bored. Mm-hmm. But also ran the 10,000 and the 5,000, pretty long races. Won my conference in the steeple a number of times and ran pretty well. But I only ran 3 years, and I graduated and got into law school and thought, for a very short time, maybe I'd take a year sort of in graduate school, kind of semi-studying and running, and quickly dispensed of that.
That's right. Law school didn't allow you time to run.
I ran a little bit when I first got there with the track team there, and then eventually just decided I should be focused on my work. I mean, law school doesn't really permit a lot of extracurricular.
So you went to Yale.
Yes.
Okay. How was that different from Southern? I mean, what kind of
Well, it's
change?
different in a lot of ways, but it was an easy transition for me, I thought. I embraced the fact that the law school there was focused on policy and the big ideas connected to law. And so it was, very engaging for me. When I was an undergraduate, as often happens on undergraduate campuses, I was one of just 4 distance runners on the track team. So we weren't, we had a track team of 50 people. And, I'm out running around the campus all the time. And so I'd become like a known person, right? Like that crazy guy who runs around campus all the time.
Okay.
Because it is hot and humid in Louisiana, it does seem a little crazy to be running for 5 or 6 miles every day. But in any event, that I think, and coming from a school that was basically open admissions at the time, being a good student I was a part of a small group of people who were really good students, and we kind of knew each other, but it was a very mixed student body, and you had to learn to deal with everybody, and that was a good experience. Going to Yale, where everybody was smart, the natural question that people asked me was, how did I transition? But it was an easy transition. I was happy to be around folk I could talk to about big ideas. And the only part that was a little bit different were the people who were much older students who had, been out in the work world for a long time, and I didn't have much to talk with them about.
Okay. But so there was the discussion. How about the going from rural Louisiana to New Haven and
Well, I felt like it was an easy transition too, because I had gone from a community outside of a small town, and then I'd moved to a small city in Baton Rouge, which I think was probably 450,000 people at the time, to New Haven, which was maybe twice that size, and with access to New York, so I could get to know the city in small bites. So that, I think, made the transition work better, and it also helped that I was coming from small places to be in a town like New Haven, where the university is really on an island. It's a very poor city, kind of the Rust Belt come to the east, as you might guess. It was a gun-making town, and those factories closed or moved away. A number of other sort of heavy industries that were in the town that had disappeared long before the 80s when I was in law school.
Okay. So you graduate from law school. You then go back, or no, you work for
Human Rights Watch.
The Human Rights Watch, doing civil rights.
No, I was doing human rights work.
In Egypt, was it? About Egypt or something?
About Egypt. I worked with Middle East Watch. At the time, they were separate entities under an umbrella organization of Human Rights Watch. They were later combined into one. But the Middle East Watch projects that I worked on started with some of the post-Gulf War I issues, displacement of Kuwaiti Palestinians who were stateless, and trying to figure out, what should be done with them from a human rights perspective. But the big project was a project in Egypt on, it started as a project on torture. There had been an Amnesty International report on torture in Egyptian prisons, I think in 1980. So at that point, we were doing a 10-year follow-up. But when we were there on the ground, we got permission to visit their prisons. And so it morphed into both a prison report, a prison inspection and report, and a torture report. And we produced both of those as book-length reports when we got back.
Did they make a difference?
Well, I don't think so. It was a complicated relationship, naturally, with Egypt, who's after the peace accords with Israel gets lots of money from us. There are long been our partners there, and that obviously is in transition now after the Arab Spring. But I think it was very hard for us to press Egypt, very, very difficult. It was very difficult for us to press them to make changes, because obviously they were one of our few partners in that region.
Okay. So then you do that, and then at some point, right, you go to LSU to be a professor.
Correct.
And you specialize in civil rights.
Yes.
And teaching courses on civil rights.
Mm-hmm.
And was it different coming back or going back to Baton Rouge in a different?
It was, but I think it was as much because Louisiana was going through pretty sharp changes. My view about Louisiana is that because of oil, they were delayed in making the adjustments in their economy that you saw in the rest of the South, especially in places like Alabama and Georgia and Mississippi. And so at the time I got there, they were experiencing wave after wave of budget crisis because oil prices had gotten really low, and having to figure out what they were going to do with the rest of their economy. And I don't know that they've been very successful, actually. They moved from, very low in the rankings of, poverty in schools to the very bottom during the time I was there. At the same time, the law school there is almost 100 years old when I started, and was well established. We had a faculty that had been built primarily in the late 60s and early 70s, so it was a very experienced faculty. So it was a nice place to get to be a young law professor. I had a lot of support from my colleagues, and even though we had probably very different perspectives on issues that we talked about, they were still very helpful and supportive, and I think that I carry that with me going forward.
Well, good. And then at some point you take the plunge and become a dean.
Yeah.
And then and now starting in July you become the provost.
Yes.
And we'll get to the issue of provost. But I did want to ask about whether you've talked to your brother, the one who's at Ohio State, who's a regular traditional liberal arts faculty member in political science.
Oh, sure.
About the dark side of you being an administrator? Does he give you a hard time about?
No, not so much.
Not
I mean,
so
I
much?
think he's proud of what I'm doing. Both he and his wife are on the political science
Okay.
faculty there, so they doubled up. And, I do see through them the challenges of trying to get their research done. He's a quantitative political scientist, so he gets grants every once in a while, and he is desperate to be on the big national surveys with his questions. And those are big challenges for him, and he's constantly crunching numbers, which is a very different experience from the kind of scholarship law professors
Right.
do.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, I'm very familiar of that kind of work in my own experiences.
that's
but,
right.
But it is interesting to see. So you've become the provost. What does a provost do?
Yeah. So the provost is the chief academic officer, and traditionally the provost job, I discovered this, of course, in the lead up to it, but really the provost position in the Americas had an early beginning and then disappeared. So Penn, Ben Franklin was the president of Penn, appointed a provost and had one for 5 or 6 years. Then he retired, and of course that person became president and didn't appoint a provost, and that was the end of that. But the provost position as we know it today is a product of the increasing complexity of the university and emerges after World War II in tandem with the growth in size and complexity of universities, and really is an ability to get campus work done and to keep the academic mission going forward while the president is being pulled in multiple directions. So I'm both the president's stand-in in a lot of circumstances, but also primarily responsible for our academic mission. As is the case at many schools, the research mission is split between my office and the vice president for research, and that's helpful because it gives us two entities working on it.
Okay. I want to talk about, you talk about administering and the administration of the university, the academic side.
Mm-hmm.
I think at a recent event we had a discussion of, and I would like, if we can, pull up this chart about some areas of emphasis that I think you elicited here or brought out and said. And I'd like to maybe touch on each of these if we can, and get your ideas. We have about 10 or 15 more minutes, 10 minutes more to talk about these things. So, but when you talk about campus culture and an area of emphasis for you, what are we talking about? What are the things that you're interested in?
Well, we've had a tough 4 years, and we have a faculty that's decided to stay. They chose staying here and committing themselves to the school. So partly it's honoring their decision to stay and addressing the issues that are impediments to them being successful in their research and in their teaching. We also have hired a number of people this year to fill holes in our faculty, and that's a really amazing group of folk that we've hired. An extraordinary hiring year for us, both in number and in quality. So we want to capture the energy of the new hires and the dedication of our existing faculty, really to move us forward out of the tough several years that we've had.
Okay. And what about this? I know this is one that you particularly talked about, the issue of diversity in the climate.
Yeah.
And so what are the issues or the points that you want to talk about or emphasize this year in the diversity?
I think in any larger institution, but especially in higher education, you have to periodically focus on how we deal with one another. And the key issue for me is that we treat one another well so that we can all be productive. It's often frustrating, and we get built up and we take our frustrations out on the people closest to us sometimes. So in terms of climate, we want to really emphasize improving our campus climate in order to eliminate impediments to our productivity. Diversity is a key issue for us. We are in an extremely diverse town. Our secondary school system is even more diverse. And so we are now at a point where Latino students constitute half of the secondary school students, and that's the pool that we primarily will pull from. We, of course, serve the rest of Nevada and the region more generally, but the next generation will be an extremely diverse generation, and we need to be sensitive to that. We certainly need to be sensitive to diversity on our faculty, ensuring that everyone is getting the support they need to be able to be successful and recognized for the hard work that they're doing.
And just let me take a minute on that. Part of that diversity and insensitivity to the faculty is we've created some new mentoring programs, if I'm not mistaken, right? And what are we trying to do with that?
Well, the mentoring program is designed to connect our young faculty with more experienced faculty and to help guide them through what is a very intense and intimidating process in becoming a tenured and ultimately a complete professor. So the main goal there is really to help guide our young faculty through this process. But I think there's a larger goal, which is to create interconnectivity across departments and colleges that will inspire multidisciplinary research and help us to build the sort of fabric of connections. Any institution that goes through the kinds of cuts that we've had for the last few years, some of those connections are frayed. You know, we lost some experienced faculty members, we lost some faculty members to retirement who had been here for a really long time and who had served significant leadership roles on campus. So we think that in addition to doing the natural sort of mentoring and modeling that you'd get from a mentoring program, this also create more substantial substructure for us and make us a stronger entity and a more cohesive one.
Okay. And again, part of that mentoring is to understand the diversity of our faculty, especially as we're getting a more diverse, younger faculty.
Correct.
In that.
I'm not sure that the general public really knows how diverse UNLV is. We are preparing in the near future to apply for Hispanic serving status with the federal government as a reflection of the diversity of our student body, but we're also diverse in lots of other ways. Our students come from lots of different backgrounds, have lots of different experiences. We have older students in larger numbers than many of our peer institutions. And the key thing is that we reflect Las Vegas and Southern Nevada, and we need to be able to serve Las Vegas and Southern Nevada effectively. So diversity is key for that. Our faculty is pretty diverse too, and we're improving in that area as well. But they are really the engines for the future for us, right? We can talk as much as we like as administrators about, what the university will be and can do, but if the faculty doesn't do it or doesn't embrace it, it's not really going to happen. So mentoring serves that role as well. We really want to ensure that going forward we are as good a school as we can be, and that really turns on developing our faculty.
Okay, great. Let me ask you, in relationship to the development of faculty, I think there's the one topic was academic renewal.
Yeah.
What do you mean by academic renewal?
Well, I think that's a title to hit some of the points we've just talked about, right? It's been a tough 4 years, and we're marching forward. I think the other thing is that, the president has been emphasizing the degree to which, we are a willing and able partner for development issues, for social support issues in Southern Nevada, and we're eager to work on that. So some of it is aligning our mission with, those goals, but simultaneously making sure that we're as strong an institution as possible. I believe in high expectations, and you set them and then you support people to be able to achieve them. And that, I think, is really the kind of guiding force behind our renewal efforts. Okay.
Now, there are a couple other issues that you had as area of emphasis, but I'm going to maybe ask that we come back and talk about those, because I think there's really something that you've talked about at other times when you were a dean in the Dean's Council and that's the wow factor.
Yeah.
When you talk about the wow factor and you talk about your experience at LSU and when you were a faculty member there and you said wow, what do you mean by a wow factor, and what should the university be doing in terms of encouraging students to say wow?
Yes, no, of course.
Right?
I mean, I think the university experience is fundamentally about expanding our perspective on the universe, to be a little bit redundant. And so the way that you achieve that, most kids come to school with something that really, really interests them, and you want to be able to cultivate and nurture that. But you also want to show them some other things that they had never imagined were possible or true or even existed. Or in this, plugged in period, most people have heard about lots of things, but they don't really grasp its complexity or its scope. And so for me, I search for these wow factors all the time in my own life. And, you know, I read a book a couple of years ago about, you know, the state of technology, which of course is now dated. But I remember reading about, you know, facial recognition technology and just sitting there stunned for a few minutes. And so as a university, we have faculty that is, you know, very well known and working on research projects that are idiosyncratic in a certain way, but also fully capable of, you know, being awe-inspiring to kids who encounter it. And that's why it's important for us to think about ways to put those issues in front of our students, because we can't say for any given student whether they're going to, you know, sit in this class and say this class was fantastic. I've never imagined any of this stuff before, but we do know for that student there will be a class, there should be a class or 2 or 5 of them that has that same effect. In my own case, it was literature. I was a reader, but I tended to read, you know, more or less nonfiction when I was in high school, and then suddenly I started reading literature, and I was like, this is fabulous. And so now it's something I do every day.
Well, good. And we can talk about that, because I know you've given us at the Dean's Council some suggestions about what we ought to read.
Well, not
that
so
was
much.
before you were provost, and people could discard some of that. But I think it is important, and it is a factor that, you know, that as an university, that our primary responsibility is to our undergraduates, and you've captured that that we ought to have students coming away from the university with a wow factor.
Sure.
Right? I mean, I think that's a central role. At some other time, I think we're getting close in, but we can talk about the role of professional schools and other things at the university. But I want to thank you for coming and allowing us to have a kind of picture glimpse of John White and the background and the role of the university and the role of the provost at the university in some of the areas that you want to pay attention to. I want to thank the audience for paying attention to us, listening to us, and if you have any questions, please be sure to write us at the Greenspan College of Urban Affairs. Thank you very much. Thank you, John.